Hey folks, welcome back. My name is Cyrus Davis, and today I have another deck profile for you. This one's going to be a bit of a quicker one, and I went to a League Cup today and placed top 4 with this list, so it's actually going to be a good old paper deck list. So I played a Snorlax build that does not play Rotom V, and instead plays Enriching Energy and Boxed Order as your sort of draw cards to get you set up and continue to find you the pieces that you need, counter catchers, key supporters. The deck felt very consistent, very powerful. The big problem with Rotom right now is that it's a little bit more prone to Dusknoir, and it is really not great against Regidrago right now. The matchup's a lot closer than it once was. It definitely has always been winnable for Regidrago, but now with the Alolan Executory X allowing them to fairly easily, with a flip of coin, kill your Rotom V on the bench, it's just so much more of a liability in that matchup than it already was. So I'm trying this new list without the Rotom. This build of the deck with the boxed orders was sort of popularized by Sander Wojcik, who played it at a regional a few months back. But now with Surging Sparks, we have Enriching Energy, another little draw card that makes the deck run way smoother than sort of the choppy build that it sort of felt like before without the boxed orders and a whole slew of like random supporter cards that weren't as strong. So let's get right into it. First, of course, we have for Snorlax, that block ability, preventing Pokemon from retreating, becoming your win con in most matchups. You definitely can win with other stuff, but Snorlax is key to your game plan pretty much always. Most decks do not have enough ways to keep attacking if you can just bring up a Pokemon that isn't able to attack with Snorlax and run them out of switching cards. So this is a win con in almost every matchup, and decks that Snorlax isn't good against typically are pretty tough matchups for you regardless. We do have 2 Mimikyu. So Mimikyu can't be damaged by Pokemon Vs or EXs. This helps us buy time, especially when our opponent has an attacker active and is swinging at us and we don't have something that we can trap, or maybe we don't have a counter catcher. This buys extra time, especially against decks like Raging Bolt. We can sort of just stick some Mimikyus against them and keep bringing up the Raging Bolt and forcing them to retreat back into their Slitherwing. Also really good against Terapagos, really any Dusknoir deck, which can sort of make the Snorlax strategy a little bit weaker. What they can do is they can use multiple Dusknoirs, take a couple of extra knockouts, and then Iono us to a low hand size. And then we can struggle to just keep finding Snorlaxes at that point. So the Mimikyus really just allow us to force those Dusknoir decks to use their Dusknoirs on the Mimikyu. That way they can't use them as carefully. They have to be committed to, carelessly. They have to be committed to knocking out the Mimikyus because they don't typically have great answers to the Mimikyu otherwise. Then we have 1 Pidgeot V. This is a card that's been in and out of Snorlax lists for a while. It has made its way back into this list as a very key card now with that Enriching Energy. So Enriching Energy, if I didn't mention it before, when you attach it, it allows you to draw 4 cards. And of course, Pidgeot V can shuffle itself back into the deck. So what you can do is you can use attach the Enriching Energy to Pidgeot, and then shuffle the Pidgeot back in, and do it again at another one in the game, allowing you to draw the fresh 4 cards with the Enriching Energy attachment over and over again throughout the game. Next, we have the supporters. So we have 3 copies of Arven. Not playing quite as many as a traditional Snorlax list, just because it's not as important for us to get like the Rotom turn 1. We're much more content to use some of our other supporters and to find other ways to draw cards, like Colress's Tenacity for the Enriching Energy. So just playing a few copies of those Arven to make sure that we can still, find our counter catchers when we need them, get our box orders out early, and have access to some of those one-of tool cards that we do play. 3 copies of Penny for healing our Snorlax mostly. Of course, can heal the Mimikyu and the Pidgeot as well, but just a very key card in Snorlax. We often want to use all 3 of these in a game, potentially more, if our opponent has a Pokemon that is active and is picking away at us damage-wise, but not quite knocking us out. A lot of time, there's decks that can sort of not quite one-shot Snorlax or not quite one-shot Mimikyu, and while we look for a way to bring up one of their Pokemon that can't attack, or maybe find something off of an Accompanying Flute, we need to use Penny to buy some time, do some healing. You can also get our Pidgeot V out of the active, which can be not such a great starter, generally speaking, since it can't shuffle itself back in from the active position. Then we have 2 of those Colress's Tenacity that I mentioned earlier, allowing us to search for a Stadium or a Special Energy. Of course, we do play 1 of Mist Energy to prevent stuff like Phantom Dive or Genome Hacking on our Mimikyu, but mostly just searching out that Enriching Energy as a nice draw 4. Draw 4 on a supporter card is already fairly strong as it is, so being able to also search at a Stadium at the same time, very, very nice. Next, we have 2 copies of Eri. So Eri, of course, letting us look at our opponent's hand and discard some items there, getting rid of key switching cards, Night Stretchers, rare candies. Just a very, very key part of any Snorlax game plan, since most of those cards that are going to allow our opponent to maneuver their Pokemon out of the active are going to be item cards. And in this same vein, Misfortune Sisters, for when our opponent, we already know that our opponent doesn't have the out that they need in hand, we can start targeting it in their deck before they can draw into it. And that way we can sort of get rid of those item cards proactively instead of having to wait for them to draw them, because a lot of the time you'll reach a position where your opponent is just going to play their switch card to attack again every single time that they draw it. So airing them out of their hand and then using Sisters to attack their deck before they can draw into new ones. 2 copies of Boss's Orders. So we're not always going to be behind on prize cards, of course, especially early in the game. So a couple copies of Boss's Orders to make sure that we can still gust in those situations is very nice, especially against Dusknoir decks, which can sort of make us take prize cards. That way we are at even prizes. Even something like Cloth, which can poison itself, can force us to take a knockout to try to play around Counter Catcher. So just a couple of Boss for that situation is very, very nice. Of course, we can also only play 4 Counter Catcher and it can't be recycled, so having a Gust that is recyclable is also very, very important. That way we don't run out of gusting options in the late game. We have 1 Worker. So Worker, just a nice generic draw 3 card. Since we don't have Rotom, we require a little bit more draw. That's why we play the Enriching Energy and the Boxed Orders. Worker, another one of those options. We also play a 1 of Jubilife Village, which allows us to shuffle our hand into our deck and draw 5. But of course that is a Stadium, so our opponent can also use that to prevent themselves from decking out. So we'll want to use Jubilife Village while we're, making sure that we keep finding our resources, establishing our lock, and then once we run our opponent out of resources and no longer need the Jubilife Village, we can Worker, discard it, and then move on to decking our opponent out. Then, in the same vein, for decking our opponent out, we have the 1 of Xerosic Machinations. This is a card that I might not necessarily play to a major event. It tends to be a way to just win the game faster. If you play it in combination with Iono, it can be very good in the Control Mirror. I did not play the Iono for it. I was mostly just playing this because I was going to Elite Cup. That was best of 1, meaning that I had a limited amount of time to win my games, and I didn't want to have some unfortunate ties, and I figured Xerosic would help me close out those wins. That being said, I didn't end up actually needing it, and if I were going to go into a major event, I would probably cut it for either maybe another consistency card or Cornerstone Mask Overcon EX as an additional wall card. Even Roseanne's Backup was something that I'm heavily considering the deck to recover Special Energy, Stadium, and Tools if you need to. Speaking of recovery, though, we have 1 of Cyllene and 1 of Team Yell's Cheer, sort of our infinite recovery package. So Cyllene, of course, getting back whatever card we need, and Team Yell's Cheer getting back all of our supporters. Cyllene, of course, a little bit weaker in consistency-wise because of the flip, but it is necessary to get those Pal Pad backs to make sure that we don't deck out, and sometimes get back more Accompanying Flute when we need more, or Counter Catchers, even Energy or Tools. It is currently in the list the only way to recover those, so Cyllene can be very important for that as well. And then Team Yell's Cheer, just a nice guaranteed supporter retrieval, allowing us to primarily reuse that Cyllene and get a couple of other supporters back at the same time. These two together, as long as they're not prized, pretty much prevent us from decking out, except against other control decks, which might have options to counter them. We have 1 of Erika's Invitation to round out the supporter line. Just a nice way to pick Pokemon from our opponent's hand that they might be holding there. They might be thinning Pokemon out of their deck to play around Accompanying Flute, and Erika's can target their hand. Or if they Turo or Penny up a Pokemon that we just recently trapped and they didn't immediately discard it, then we can go over Erika's Invitation to target that Pokemon in their hand. Just a nice way to try to find something that we can trap that can't attack onto the board. Now let's move on to the item cards. So we have a lot of 4-ofs here. We have 4 Pokégear. Nice way to find our supporters. Maximum count, because this is super important that we just find the right supporters at the right time. We just want to max that out for consistency purposes. 4 boxed orders. This is the best way to end our turn. Search deck for a couple of items, whether it be Pokégears, Accompanying Flutes, or Counter Catcher, Nest Balls, any of the item cards that we're about to see. Boxed order, just the optimal way to end your turn when you're not using instant charge. For Accompanying Flute, allowing us to target our opponent's Pokemon in deck. This can be your only win con against some of your auto losses, sort of filling their bench with useless Pokemon before they can set up. Is a genuine win con, so you can beat Lugia. Very helpful against Cloth as well, which can be a tough matchup. So Accompanying Flute, very important. Even decks that are sort of your even matchups or your weaker matchups. Even some of your like positive matchups are very reliant on the Accompanying Flute. Decks like Dragapult can sort of just go lone Dragapult and never bench anything else, maybe prevent themselves from having an Erika target in hand. So you're going to need Accompanying Flute to find those Pokemon to make sure that you can have something to trap. Even if you can find something off like an Erika later, typically you need to get the Accompanying Flutes out early game. Make sure that your opponent doesn't take too many prize cards before you start trapping something. Because if they take too many prize cards beforehand, then whatever switching cards they have remaining might be enough for them to seal the deal and take their last few prize cards. For Counter Catcher, of course, pretty much staple in Snorlax. You just want to keep bringing up Pokemon that can't attack. So we're playing the maximum count of these Counter Catchers, almost always behind on prize cards. Just a staple. You would never, if you could play 5 or 6, you probably would. This card is just incredibly powerful and has very little drawback in a deck like Snorlax. For Nest Ball, I've seen some lists with 3. I know All Out Blitzel and King Heracross, who played a very similar list that I took some inspiration from. Played only 3 copies of Nest Ball. That was something that I felt needed correcting probably. I think just the maximum count of these for consistency is best, especially to make sure that you just don't get donked, get a bunch of Snorlaxes out really early, and find Pidgeot as often as possible to combo with that Enriching Energy. 2 copies of Pal Pad. Pal Pad just is another essential card in Snorlax. Again, we can't access our prize cards, so we don't want to risk prizing these. We can probably get away with only 1 most games, but we need at least 1 most games. So we can't afford to have our only Pal Pad prized. So we're playing 2 copies just to make sure that we can get our supporters back. And of course, in games where neither of them are prized, having 2 in the deck is still incredibly strong. We play so many powerful supporters, we want to be able to get them back whenever we want. To Night Stretcher to get our Pokemon back, make sure that we can keep our Snorlaxes on the board. If our Pidgeot gets knocked out, it might be our only way to get that back for Enriching Energy. We also might just need to get more Mimikyus out. We only play 2, and there's some matchups where using more than 2 Mimikyu can be pretty important. So 2 Night Stretcher just to make sure that we can keep getting more and more Pokemon out. Also, the 2 Night Stretchers means we don't necessarily even need to Team Yell cheer a Snorlax back to make our opponent go through 6 of them. We can go 4 Snorlax plus 2 Night Stretcher, that's 6 Snorlax. So our opponent needs to knock out 6 to get all of their prize cards. We don't have to throw something like a Mimikyu at them or anything like that when we run out of lax. 1 Switch Cart. This card that's maybe not completely necessary, but it can be a key heal for Snorlax to buy you a turn of attacking. Same with Mimikyu. And if you open the Pidgeot V, this is the most consistent way to get it out of the active, rather than having to use a turn pennying it. It also just allows you to buy a turn if you know your Pidgeot V can't be knocked out. You can let it take a hit and then switch card it back to the bench. That way you don't have to discard an energy to retreat it and then Vanishing Wings. So Switch Cart just having a few very solid uses in the deck. Mostly just a consistency card, lets you do some plays significantly smoother. Our last item card, 1 Hisuian Heavy Ball, just to make sure that we have access to our Pidgeot always and all of our Snorlaxes. Of course, some games we might prize 1 or 2 Pokemon, like 2 or more Pokemon that are important, but that will be a not as significant portion of the game. So Hisuian Heavy Ball, just as a one-of, will usually do the trick and get whatever we need out of our prize cards. Especially considering that we only play 6 basic Pokemon. We just played 2 Stadium cards. So starting with the 1 Artazon, just another way to get our Snorlaxes and our Mimikyus out. Kind of just serves as a 5th Nest Ball, while also being a nice Stadium bump for some annoying stadiums like Temple of Sinnoh and Jamming Tower, which can actually cause us some significant issues. It can also be used multiple times, right? So we can get multiple Snorlax with this if our opponent doesn't bump it. And another nice thing about Artazon and Snorlax is that a lot of the time your opponent doesn't really have much use for it because they don't want to bench extra Pokemon that are going to get trapped. Then we have our second stadium, the Jubilife Village I mentioned earlier. Just another way to end your turn by drawing some more cards if you don't have what you need in your hand. Once during your turn, that each player may shuffle their hand to their deck, draw 5 cards, and if they do, they end their turn. It's also really nice with the Enriching Energy because you can attach the Enriching Energy to the Pidgeot V, draw 4, shuffle it back in, and then end your turn with Jubilife and potentially draw back into the Enriching Energy for next turn. All right, just a few cards left. Let's get into the tools. We have one Handheld Fan. This is just very key in certain matchups like Dragapult, Regidrago. We can get rid of all of their fire energy onto a Pokemon that can attack, or against something like Gardevoir, where we really need to move some of their energy onto useless Pokemon in order to create a position where they don't have enough energy to attack with all of their Pokemon in play. Usually something like that, like Gardevoir, can fill their board with only Pokemon that technically can attack, so we want to move some of those energy around, that way they can't set all of them up. Luxurious Cape, bumping our Snorlax's HP up to 250 or Mimikyu's up to 170. On the Mimikyu, it's very key for playing around Dusknoir, and on the Snorlax, 250 can just tank a lot of hits that 150 can't. Luxurious Cape, a card that honestly I used a ton today. There are just so many situations in which you can feel pretty safe with a Snorlax that has 250 HP, and it is very key against those Dusknoir decks. One of Bravery Charm, so of course a little bit weaker than Luxurious Cape, but not giving up that extra prize card, just making our Snorlax a little bit more difficult to knock out, while not risking the extra prize card to it in situations where maybe the Pokemon that our opponent currently has active cannot one-shot a Snorlax with 200 HP, but they have something else that can, that we could get punished for attaching the Luxurious Cape against. So Bravery Charm, just making our opponent's lives a little bit more difficult without as much risk. It also can be used on the Pidgeot V to bump it up to 260. That way you can tank a hit and then heal it with Vanishing Wings. Not something I did a ton today, but just something that you can do in general, whereas you can't bump Pidgeot's HP with Luxurious Cape. Our last tool, single copy of Forest Seal Stone. This card was like huge for me today. Just a big consistency bump with the Pidgeot, allowing you to once per game search for anything, whether it be the counter catcher that you need at just the right moment, the exact supporter card that you need at that moment, or even just the Enriching Energy to draw 4 cards and keep going. Great for early game setup, great for mid game, great for late game. Whenever you find it, this card can just find you whatever you need. And if you don't have to use it early game, then usually this can be a game sealer late game. Maybe you just need Arven for Stone to find whatever you need to seal the game at the very end off of something like an Iono. Then for our energy, we have one Mist Energy, like I talked about, just to prevent against Phantom Dive and stuff like genome hacking on our Mimikyu primarily. Also stops Frenzied Gouging on Mimikyu, which can be fairly nice. And then last, but certainly not least, is that one of Enriching Energy A-Spec, allowing us to draw 4 cards every time that we attach it. This works really well with Pidgeot, of course, because we can attach it, shuffle the Pidgeot back in, but what we can also do is just attach it to a Pokemon that we're about to use Penny on. So we attach it to that Pokemon, draw 4, and then Penny the Pokemon into our hand to get the Enriching Energy back and use it again on the next turn. And another nice thing about Enriching Energy is that it allows you to draw the cards that you put to the top of your deck with Cyllene right away. So you can Cyllene, put maybe a counter catcher or an accompanying flute that you need on top of your deck, and then Enriching Energy to draw back into it. It also allows you to play around Eri against other Snorlax or control decks if you Cyllene your Pal Pad on top and then use the Enriching Energy to draw the Pal Pad and use it immediately. That way it can't be targeted by Misfortune Sisters or something like Iono into Luxray V to discard the Pal Pad, or whatever else you might have put on the top of your deck. So that's the deck. It felt super strong. I think Snorlax is definitely one of my top considerations for Toronto Regionals. Right now is between that and a couple of other decks, but I think that if I do play Snorlax for Toronto Regionals, this somewhere around this list is what I will go with. Like I said, the only things that I was really considering that I didn't have in the list today were that Cornerstone Mask over Pontiacs and potentially a Roseanne's backup. or just another generic consistency card, maybe even a second worker could be solid. But otherwise, I think the list was incredibly strong. It worked really consistently. I only lost to Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon EX with Noivern EX in top 4, which is against someone I know very well. And that is a very, very tough matchup. So very happy with how the deck performed. I highly recommend it. If you don't have Rotoms or just want to have some fun with Enriching Energy, this is the deck for you. Thank you everyone for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want to check out any of my other content or socials. My link tree is in the description below. Have a great one.